The heavy, solid green sheet of a divorce paper was thrown callously onto the mahogany dining table, landing right beside a half-cold plate of stew that I had spent 2 hours preparing. Standing right next to my husband was a young woman in her mid-20s wearing a designer dress that cost more than my entire yearly household budget, flashing a triumphant, mocking smile that pierced straight through my heart. "Sign it right now, my husband of 20 years, Kazuhiko demanded without a shred of remorse or warmth in his eyes, introducing her as the woman who would replace me and carry his future child. For 2 decades, I had sacrificed my youth, my personal dreams, and my independent career to care for his bedridden parents and manage this home only to be discarded like a piece of valueless trash in less than 5 minutes. Any normal person in my shoes would have screamed, broken down in tears, or slapped him across the face in a fit of uncontrollable rage. But at that exact moment, an eerie, absolute silence washed over my soul, freezing my emotions into a calm sheet of ice. Without saying a single word, I picked up the pen and signed my name on the dotted line with a steady, unshakable hand, watching their smirks grow even wider as they celebrated what they believed was an effortless victory. What Kazuhiko and his smug mistress did not know was that they had just walked into a financial and legal trap that would completely dismantle their lives within a matter of days. In my apron pocket, my fingers tightly gripped a single thick brown envelope that had arrived via certified mail just an hour earlier, a document containing a secret that would make their high-priced lawyers freeze in pure terror. This is the story of how an arrogant husband who thought he could use me as free labor and throw me away realized that he had accidentally signed away his entire existence, turning his shallow triumph into an endless descent into financial ruin and legal despair. The clock on the wall struck 9 in the evening, and outside a cold, relentless rain beat heavily against the window panes, casting long, dark shadows across the living room. For 20 years I had lived a life of strict frugality, riding my bicycle for miles to find the cheapest groceries, wearing the same faded clothes for years, and keeping the heater at the lowest setting just to ensure Kazuhiko could focus on his corporate career without any financial pressure. My hands were rough and split from constant cleaning, my hair was streaked with undyed grey, and my entire identity had been swallowed by the exhausting routine of changing adult diapers and waking up in the dead of night to comfort his wandering senile parents. When the front door lock had clicked open earlier that night, I eagerly stood up to reheat his favorite dinner, only to freeze when I heard the distinct, sharp clacking of high heels accompanying his heavy footsteps. The door swung open, and the suffocatingly sweet, overwhelming scent of expensive perfume instantly erased the familiar smell of our home as Kazuhiko walked in with Maya clinging tightly to his arm. Kazuhiko did not even look at the dinner I had prepared. Instead, he looked down at my faded apron and bare face with an expression of pure disgust, as if he were looking at an unsightly servant rather than his wife. "I am completely finished with you, and I need you to sign these papers immediately, because Maya is pregnant with my child, and I am not going to let our family legacy be tied to a worn-out woman who looks like an old maid," he stated coldly. Maya looked at me with clear eyes of superiority, saying with a sugary, fake voice that she felt sorry for me. But Kazuhiko deserved a glamorous, relaxing home life that an old, exhausted woman simply could not provide anymore. "You have completely let yourself go. And honestly, looking at you constantly, taking care of elderly people, and wearing those rags has become completely unbearable for Kazuhiko, who is meant for greatness," she added, patting her expensive, brand-new bag. Every single word they threw at me was intended to crush my dignity and force me to beg for mercy. But the intense sadness and betrayal inside me suddenly crossed a threshold, turning into an indestructible shield of absolute clarity. Kazuhiko believed that by bringing his mistress directly into our home and presenting a pre-signed divorce paper, he would catch me off guard, causing me to break down so he could dictate the terms of our separation without any resistance. He hurriedly pulled out his seal and expected a long, dramatic argument about alimony and asset division, but my absolute silence and immediate signature left him momentarily speechless, his mouth hanging open in utter confusion. "Are you seriously not going to fight or cry? Or are you just acting tough because you know you are completely powerless against us? Maya asked, her triumphant smile faltering slightly at my lack of response. I calmly pushed the perfectly completed divorce paper back across the table toward Kazuhiko, my voice sounding incredibly grounded and serene as I looked him dead in the eye and said, "If this is exactly what you want, then we are completely finished." Kazuhiko, suddenly feeling awkward because he did not want to look like the absolute villain in front of his new mistress, cleared his throat and tried to assume a generous persona, offering to throw me a tiny amount of settlement money so I wouldn't starve on the streets. "I am not a monster, and since you spent so many years managing the household chores, I will provide a small cash payment to help you get by, though you cannot expect to keep this house or any of our savings," he announced arrogantly. I slowly shook my head, looked at him with an expression of profound indifference, and replied softly, "I do not want a single yen of your alimony. I waive all rights to asset division, and you can keep this entire house, the bank accounts, and everything inside it." The moment those words left my mouth, the entire atmosphere of the room completely froze, and the only sound that remained was the heavy rain slamming against the glass as both of them stared at me, as if I had completely lost my mind. To them, a woman who had spent 20 years counting every single penny and sacrificing everything for the household budget, refusing all money, was a deeply unnatural, terrifying sight that did not make any sense. "Are you completely serious about this? Or is this some kind of twisted psychological trick to make me feel guilty?" Kazuhiko demanded, his voice trembling slightly with an underlying current of unexplainable anxiety. "My only condition is that you take these documents to the ward office first thing tomorrow morning and ensure the divorce is legally registered without a single day of delay or dispute." I answered coldly, keeping my hands deep inside my apron pockets, where the crisp edges of the legal envelope provided an immense sense of security. Kazuhiko's long-standing marital instincts briefly signaled that something was profoundly wrong, but the glittering temptation of an effortless, absolute victory was far too powerful for his greedy mind to resist. He realized he was getting a young mistress a completely free path to a new life and an immediate divorce without losing a single cent of his current wealth or assets to his ex-wife. "Fine if you want to walk away as a completely penniless fool. I will gladly accept your stupidity and take care of the registration tomorrow," he sneered quickly, grabbing the papers and sharing a triumphant laugh with Maya. They genuinely believed that they had stripped me of everything and won the ultimate prize, entirely unaware that the legal trapdoor beneath their feet had just been completely unlocked. I turned around and walked quietly into the bedroom, completely ignoring the muffled, arrogant laughter echoing from the living room as Kazuhiko and Maya celebrated their perceived total victory over my life. Packing up my entire 20-year marriage took an astonishingly short amount of time, as I only took a few changes of plain clothing and basic toiletries, leaving behind the tarnished wedding ring on the dresser table. I purposefully left my name-bearing passbooks with their meager savings on the table, looking around the room one last time at the black scuff marks on the lower walls where his late father's wheelchair had repeatedly bumped during those long, exhausting nights. While I had spent countless sleepless nights comforting his parents and managing their medical emergencies, Kazuhiko had always slept soundly in a separate room with earplugs, claiming his corporate work was far too important to be disturbed by family duties. "Don't come crawling back to me crying for money when you realize that the real world is incredibly harsh for an unskilled middle-aged woman with absolutely nothing to her name," Kazuhiko shouted from the hallway as I carried my small bag toward the entrance. Maya's high-pitched voice followed his, mockingly asking if I even had a place to sleep that night, since my biological parents had passed away years ago and I had absolutely no safety net left. I did not utter a single word in response. Instead, I opened the front door, stepped into the freezing, pouring rain, and felt a profound surge of absolute warmth and liberation wash over my entire body as I walked away without looking back even once. The next morning, The heavy storm clouds had completely vanished, replaced by a brilliant, clear blue sky as Kazuhiko took a day of paid leave from his company to rush to the local ward office with Maya. They stood proudly at the civil registration window, watching intently as the government clerk meticulously verified every section of the divorce papers before stamping them with absolute legal finality. "The divorce has been officially processed and registered," the clerk announced in a standard robotic tone, legally severing our 20-year marital bond in a fraction of a second. "Yes," Kazuhiko shouted triumphantly, pumping his fist into the air right outside the government building, while Maya squealed with delight, wrapping her arms tightly around his neck and congratulating him on their newfound absolute freedom. "We are finally completely rid of that boring, exhausting old woman, and now we can begin our true life of luxury and high status," Kazuhiko declared, his face radiating an intense wave of arrogance and uncontainable joy. To him, today was not just the day he successfully discarded an unwanted wife without paying a single cent. It was also the single most important financial milestone of his entire existence. He looked down at Maya, proudly explaining that he had strategically chosen this exact date for the divorce because today marked the exact third anniversary of his wealthy father's passing. His late father had been a legendary, powerful, self-made tycoon who had built the massive Kawamura corporate group from scratch, making their family one of the most prominent and wealthy dynasties in the entire region. However, his father had always been exceptionally harsh and critical of Kazuhiko, easily seeing through his son's lazy, entitled, and deeply irresponsible personality. The old man had refused to grant Kazuhiko any executive power or access to the primary corporate accounts, strictly limiting his allowance and forcing him to live on a standard managerial salary, which had fueled Kazuhiko's intense resentment for years. But his father had passed away 3 years ago, and Kazuhiko was absolutely convinced that the massive family fortune, extensive real estate holdings, and corporate shares would automatically belong to him as the sole biological son. The only annoying obstacle had been a highly unusual clause in his father's final wishes, which explicitly stated that the official reading and execution of the primary estate documents could only take place exactly 3 years after his death. Kazuhiko checked his expensive luxury watch, a smug grin spreading across his face, as he told Maya that the official legal execution meeting at the prestigious Dojima law firm was scheduled for exactly 1 o'clock this afternoon. "This means that by completing our divorce this morning, I have successfully cut that woman out of my life before a single yen of the inheritance enters my name, ensuring she has absolutely no legal right to claim a single cent of my family's wealth," he explained brilliantly. He was completely intoxicated by his own perceived genius, believing he had executed the most perfect financial defense strategy in history by leaving his ex-wife completely penniless while securing billions for himself and his young mistress. At exactly 1 o'clock, Kazuhiko walked into the opulent high-security office tower located in the heart of Tokyo's most expensive business district, where the Dojima law firm had occupied the entire penthouse floor for decades. He was escorted into a massive, luxurious conference room featuring heavy mahogany tables and leather chairs, where a sharp-eyed elderly attorney was sitting silently with a thick, sealed leather binder. Lawyer Dojima had served as the personal legal counsel and strategic advisor to Kazuhiko's father for over 40 years, managing the absolute highest levels of the Kawamura Group's corporate and legal affairs. "It has been a very long time," Lawyer Dojima Kazuhiko said, arrogantly slumping deeply into the leather sofa and crossing his legs with a completely disrespectful attitude. "I have waited 3 long years for this exact day, and now that my father's accounts can finally be unfrozen, I am fully prepared to take control of my rightful inheritance and step into my position as the head of the empire," he added. Lawyer Dojima adjusted his silver-rimmed glasses, his piercing, intelligent eyes staring at the young man with a level of coldness and professional detachment that was deeply unsettling. "Yes, Kazuhiko, today is indeed the legally mandated date for the official opening and absolute execution of your late father's final estate documents," the attorney replied, his voice completely devoid of any warmth. "Before we begin, I have some excellent news that will make this process even cleaner for the firm." Kazuhiko smiled, sliding the official divorce registration certificate across the mahogany table. As of 10 o'clock this morning, my marriage to Kumiko has been completely dissolved with zero alimony, zero asset division, and total mutual consent, meaning the entire inheritance will belong solely to me without any external interference, he boasted. Kazuhiko fully expected the elderly lawyer to praise his financial sharpness and congratulate him on protecting the family line from a middle-aged outsider. But as lawyer Dojima's eyes scanned the official divorce certificate, the attorney's entire body went completely rigid, and an oppressive, suffocating silence immediately filled the massive room. The heavy ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner of the law office sounded deafening as lawyer Dojima slowly raised his head, looking at Kazuhiko with an expression of profound shock and utter disbelief. The professional, unshakable mask of the veteran corporate attorney had completely fallen away, replaced by a pale, frozen countenance that sent a sudden, unexplainable chill straight down Kazuhiko's spine. Did you actually say that the divorce was finalized this morning and that she left the marriage without making a single financial demand or asking for any compensation? Dojima asked, his voice strained. Yes, that stupid, completely uneducated woman signed the papers without asking a single question, and she walked out into the rain with nothing but a tiny gym bag. Kazuhiko laughed, reaching for his cup of coffee with absolute confidence. Kazuhiko, you absolute short-sighted fool. Lawyer Dojima whispered, his hands visibly trembling as he opened a thick, red-stamped corporate portfolio that sat at the very top of his desk. I need you to answer me with absolute honesty right now. When Kumiko packed her things and walked out of your house last night, did she happen to have a single, old brown envelope in her possession? Kazuhiko choked on his coffee, coughing slightly before waving his hand dismissively, replying that she indeed had some old crinkled envelope that she held onto tightly, though he figured it was just some personal trash or useless old letters. The moment Kazuhiko confirmed the existence of the brown envelope, every single ounce of color completely drained from lawyer Dojima's face, leaving him looking like a man who had just witnessed a catastrophic, fatal accident. The brilliant, ruthless attorney who had successfully navigated hundreds of complex corporate battles and multi-billion yen inheritances sat completely paralyzed in his chair, staring at Kazuhiko with pure, unadulterated pity. What on earth is wrong with your face, lawyer Dojima, and why are you acting like something bad happened when I just secured my entire inheritance without any legal opposition? Kazuhiko demanded, his voice cracking with a sudden wave of panic. Kazuhiko, you have absolutely no understanding of what you have done, Dojima said with an incredibly heavy, dark sigh that resonated through the room. Your ex-wife did not make any financial demands or ask for asset division because she had absolutely no need to ask for something that already completely belongs to her. What are you talking about? Kazuhiko stammered, a thick layer of cold sweat breaking out across his forehead as the perfect illusion of his grand victory began to develop massive, terrifying cracks. Dojima slammed the thick legal portfolio down onto the table, his eyes flashing with absolute coldness as he looked at the entitled son. The very moment you threw Kumiko out of your house and finalized that divorce paper, you did not protect your wealth. Instead, you completely and permanently signed away every single piece of your own existence. Kazuhiko let out a loud, forced laugh, banging his fist on the table and yelling that there was absolutely no way his father's vast empire would ever be handed over to an outsider when he was the only biological child and legal heir to the bloodline. Lawyer Dojima didn't argue. Instead, he walked over to a massive reinforced fireproof safe in the corner, inputting a complex digital code before extracting a beautiful, traditional Paulonia wood box wrapped in thick ceremonial paper. The box bore the official, unalterable red seals of the state notary office and the highest judicial authorities of the country, representing an absolute legally ironclad document that no court could ever overturn. This is the official, legally binding last will and testament of your late father, built as a notarized public deed with multiple independent witnesses, making it completely indestructible, Dojima stated, putting on white gloves and breaking the seals with extreme care. He pulled out the thick parchment written in the powerful, unmistakable calligraphy of Kazuhiko's father, and commanded Kazuhiko to sit down and listen to the absolute reality of his situation. Clause number 1, Dojima read aloud with a booming authoritative voice, "I hereby bequeath and transfer 100% of my corporate shares in the Kawamura Group, all real estate holdings, all primary cash reserves, and all family assets entirely and unconditionally to my daughter-in-law, Komura Kumiko." Kazuhiko's breathing completely stopped, his eyes bulging out of his head as his brain went entirely blank, unable to process the words entering his ears. Lawyer Dojima completely ignored his pathetic reaction and proceeded to read the next clause with absolute ruthlessness. Clause number 2. I explicitly disinherit my biological son, Kazuhiko, depriving him of any right to the estate, including his statutory elective share. This absolute disinheritance is a direct and necessary punishment for his decades of unmitigated financial recklessness, his constant corporate failures, and above all, his complete and utter abandonment of his family obligations while his wife single-handedly sustained our household and cared for our failing health. The room became so silent that the rapid, panicked beating of Kazuhiko's heart could almost be heard as he sat frozen, his face turning from a pale white to a furious, bright crimson red. This is an absolute lie, a completely fabricated piece of trash paper that manipulative woman must have forced my senile father to sign. While he was completely out of his mind, Kazuhiko roared, lunging across the table to rip the document out of the lawyer's hands. Dojima pulled the document back with lightning speed, glaring at Kazuhiko with an expression of pure disgust and commanding him to never touch an official state record. I have an official certified psychological evaluation from the chief of psychiatry at the Tokyo University Hospital, conducted on the exact day this will was drafted, proving your father possessed absolute mental clarity and flawless cognitive capacity, Dojima stated, slamming the medical folder on the table. If you attempt to challenge this will in a court of law, your chances of winning are precisely zero, and you will only succeed in exposing your own greed to the public. Kazuhiko slumped backward into his chair, his legs completely losing all strength as the sheer weight of reality crashed over him like a tidal wave. But then, a sinister, desperate glint flashed in his eyes as he remembered the events of the morning, standing up and pointing his finger at the lawyer triumphantly. Wait a single minute. Dojima, you are completely forgetting that Kumiko is no longer a member of the Kawamura family because we legally finalized our divorce at the ward office this morning, meaning she is a complete stranger who cannot inherit a traditional family estate. He screamed maniacally. He genuinely believed that his quick divorce had saved him, turning his father's final revenge into a completely useless piece of paper. Lawyer Dojima looked at Kazuhiko with an expression of profound, crushing pity, slowly shaking his head as he let out a cold, hollow laugh that echoed off the high walls of the penthouse office. Kazuhiko, your complete and utter ignorance of the law has officially cemented your absolute destruction, the attorney said, tapping the divorce certificate with the tip of his pen. A notarized will that designates a specific individual by their full legal name remains completely absolute and valid, regardless of any subsequent changes in marital status or family bloodlines. Your father explicitly left the entire empire to Kumiko as an independent individual, and the official legal execution of this transfer was scheduled for this exact afternoon, Dojima explained coldly. If you had remained married to her, you would have legally shared in her immense wealth as her lawful husband, enjoying the luxury of the Kawamura Group. Through her grace, the lawyer continued, his voice cutting like a razor. But because you were so desperate to protect your petty vanity and hide your cheap mistress, you forced her to sign a total waiver of all alimony and asset division, completely severing your own legal relationship with her before the inheritance officially took effect. You did not trick her. You literally built your own execution gallows, placed the noose around your own neck, and kicked the chair out from under yourself, Dojima declared with absolute finality. Every single drop of blood completely left Kazuhiko's face as his own arrogant words from the previous night came rushing back to torment his mind. No alimony, no asset division, a completely clean break. The very contract he had forced me to sign in his fit of supreme arrogance was actually the ultimate legal document that guaranteed his total permanent exclusion from a multi-billion-yen fortune. With trembling, unstable fingers, Kazuhiko pulled out his smartphone and frantically dialed my number, but his ears were met only with the cold automated operator message indicating that his number had been permanently blocked. At that exact moment, a bright notification from Maya popped up on his cracked screen, reading, "Hurry up and finish the inheritance paperwork, babe. I already booked a viewing for that luxury penthouse apartment in Roppongi. Love you." That cheerful, greedy text message felt like an absolute death sentence to Kazuhiko as he stared blankly at the screen, realized that he was currently standing on the absolute brink of total financial and social ruin. Meanwhile, I was sitting peacefully on the edge of a neat, quiet bed in a modest business hotel in downtown Tokyo, taking a deep, long breath of pure, untainted air. I slowly opened the thick brown envelope that I had protected with my life, the exact document sent directly to me by the Dojima law firm the previous afternoon. Inside was a massive stack of official papers, including the primary shareholder registries for the Kawamura corporate group, the absolute titles of ownership for multiple prime real estate developments, and a personal handwritten letter from my late father-in-law. My dear Kumiko, if you are reading these words, it means that I have already left this world. The old man's elegant, slightly shaky handwriting began radiating a profound sense of warmth and grandfatherly protection. I want to offer you my deepest, most sincere apologies for the immense suffering and disrespect caused by my foolish, entitled son, Kazuhiko, who has never understood the true meaning of honor or hard work. For 20 long years, you have cared for my failing body and my late wife's illnesses without a single word of complaint, sacrificing your own youth while Kazuhiko was out squandering family money, chasing shallow mistresses and treating you like an invisible servant. I am fully aware that the true foundation of the Kawamura family's survival was never my reckless son. It was always your silent strength, your profound intelligence, and your absolute dedication to this home. The letter continued. As I read his words, massive hot tears streamed down my worn face, washing away 2 decades of deep-seated loneliness, exhaustion, and self-doubt. For 20 years, I genuinely believed that nobody noticed my sacrifices, that my entire life had been completely wasted, saving pennies and changing sheets in the dark while the world passed me by. But my father-in-law had seen everything meticulously, documenting my worth and quietly preparing the ultimate legal shield to guarantee my absolute freedom and total empowerment. I am passing the entire ownership of the corporate group, the family fortune and all ancestral estates entirely to you, Kumiko, because you are the only person capable of protecting our employees and leading this legacy with true honor, the old man concluded. Please use this wealth to live a grand, beautiful life on your own terms, as this is the only way I can attempt to repay my immense debt of gratitude to you. I wiped away my tears, pressing the letter tightly against my chest, as a profound, unshakable sense of determination hardened inside my soul. My lost youth would never return, but my life was far from over. In fact, my true existence was just beginning at this exact moment. Suddenly, my smartphone on the nightstand vibrated violently, the screen continuously flashing with Kazuhiko's name as he tried to call me over 50 times within a single hour. He had clearly just left the law office, his arrogant mind shattered by the absolute reality of his total financial eviction, and his pathetic, desperate panic was radiating through the screen. Just 24 hours ago, I would have trembled at his loud, booming voice, but now I kept a completely expressionless face as I calmly pressed the button to permanently block his number from my life. I reached back into the brown envelope, pulling out the official real estate registry for the massive ancestral Kawamura mansion where Kazuhiko and Maya were currently lounging in luxury. This was the final, devastating trap that my father-in-law had quietly laid out to ensure his foolish son's complete eviction from the family line. The legal title for the grand estate had already been officially transferred into my exclusive name, meaning that my arrogant ex-husband was currently an illegal squatter in a house that belonged entirely to the woman he had just thrown out. As the sun began to set over Tokyo, Kazuhiko dragged his heavy, exhausted feet back to the grand ancestral Kawamura estate, his mind spinning in a chaotic vortex of absolute panic and denial. He unlocked the heavy traditional wooden doors, instantly noticing that the familiar, clean scent of the home had been entirely replaced by Maya's cheap, suffocatingly sweet perfume. He walked into the luxurious living room, finding Maya lounging comfortably on the expensive leather sofa, her long legs thrown carelessly over the armrest as she scrolled through a high-end luxury car website on her tablet. "Oh, you're finally back, babe," she said without even looking up, her voice dripping with an annoying entitled tone that made Kazuhiko's stomach twist into an uncomfortable knot. "Look at this gorgeous new Porsche. I want you to buy it for me first thing tomorrow because your ex-wife's old car is completely embarrassing and my friends are laughing at me on social media," she demanded. "Now that you are officially the multi-billionaire CEO of the Kawamura Group, buying a couple of sports cars and a luxury penthouse should be absolutely nothing to you." She laughed greedily. Just yesterday, Kazuhiko would have proudly smiled, kissed her cheek, and handed over his credit card to show off his immense wealth and secure her shallow affection. But now her high-pitched, demanding voice sounded like an absolute screeching drill piercing straight through his fractured skull. "Shut your mouth and leave me alone for a single minute." Kazuhiko snapped with an incredibly dark, furious tone that caused Maya to jump back in shock and pout her lips in deep offense. He ripped his necktie off, collapsing into an armchair as Dojima's words repeated in his head like an endless, terrifying chant. "You have signed away every single piece of your own existence." If Maya discovered that the inheritance was completely gone, she would pack her bags and abandon him within a single second, as her entire presence was entirely dependent on his family fortune. He needed to find a legal loophole, a hidden escape route, or some way to force me to give up the estate papers before his total ruin became public knowledge. Suddenly, the loud, sharp ringing of the front gate intercom cut through the tense silence of the mansion, causing Kazuhiko to flinch violently in his seat. He walked over to the security monitor, finding a uniformed post office delivery courier holding a thick official document that required an immediate certified signature. Kazuhiko signed for the document with a trembling hand, his eyes widening in pure horror when he saw the official return address printed on the envelope, the Dojima Law Firm Litigation Department. He hurried back into the living room, tearing the envelope open while trying to hide his shaking hands from Maya's curious gaze as he pulled out a formal legal notice, stamped with multiple official red seals. This document serves as an absolute unconditional eviction notice issued on behalf of our client, Kawamura Kumiko. The legal text read, with cold mechanical precision, as of the official execution of the late chairman's will this afternoon. The absolute title of ownership for this land and building belongs entirely to our client, and you are hereby ordered to vacate the premises within 7 days, removing all personal property and surrendering all sets of keys. Failure to comply with this legal order will result in immediate prosecution for criminal trespass, and state enforcement officers will violently remove you from the property, the notice concluded ruthlessly. Kazuhiko let out a quiet, strangled gasp, his knees nearly buckling as he realized that he had not only lost his father's billions, but he was also about to be thrown out onto the freezing streets from the very house he had lived in since the day he was born. "What is that official-looking paper you're holding? And why do you look like you're about to throw up?" Maya asked, stepping off the couch to peek over his shoulder. Kazuhiko frantically shoved the legal document behind his back, forcing an incredibly awkward, sweating smile as he claimed it was just some boring, routine corporate paperwork that he needed to handle privately outside. He practically ran out into the cold, dark garden, his chest heaving as he gasped for air, cold sweat pouring down his neck while his heart pounded like a manic war drum. In a state of absolute wild desperation, he pulled out Maya's smartphone from his pocket, a device he had borrowed earlier and completely forgotten to return. He knew that my phone had permanently blocked his primary number, but he prayed with every single fibre of his being that I would answer a call coming from his mistress's phone. He dialed my private number with an unstable finger, holding the phone to his ear as he waited in the freezing darkness of the courtyard praying for a miracle. The phone rang 4 times before the line clicked open and my voice emerged completely calm, empty of all emotion and steady as an anchor. Hello. I sat peacefully on the edge of my hotel bed, completely projecting an aura of absolute emotional detachment as Kazuhiko's frantic, heavy breathing filled the line. "Kumiko, you absolute piece of trash! What on earth do you think you are doing with my family's estate?" His loud, booming voice roared through the receiver, filled with an intense combination of sheer terror and desperate arrogance. "Why is the deed of my father's ancestral mansion registered under your pathetic name? And who gave you the right to steal what belongs to my bloodline?" he demanded aggressively. "Your father gave it to me, Kazuhiko, because he knew exactly what kind of ungrateful, deceitful monster you truly are," I answered evenly, my voice as cold as ice. "Every single legal document, property deed, and corporate transfer has been flawlessly processed and sealed by Lawyer Dojima and the State Notary Office, making my ownership completely unassailable. You are an absolute liar, and you must have manipulated a dying, senile old man to steal his money." Kazuhiko screamed like a cornered animal, resorting to the exact same gaslighting and psychological abuse he had used to control me for 2 decades. "Let me remind you who you actually are. You are a completely useless, uneducated housewife with absolutely zero corporate experience and a completely blank resume," he hurled viciously. "You spent 20 years washing my dirty underwear, cleaning my floors, and wiping my father's waste like a common servant, and you genuinely think a high school graduate like you can run a multi-billion yen corporate empire?" He laughed maniacally. "I am going to hire the most expensive litigation lawyers in this country, sue you for grand fraud, and ensure you spend the rest of your pathetic life rotting inside a maximum security prison cell if you don't return my assets right now." He threatened, trying to make me collapse into panic. Just 24 hours ago, his vicious, booming insults would have caused me to shake with fear, weeping and apologizing for things I never did, because he had systematically destroyed my self-esteem for 20 years. But now, listening to his frantic screaming felt like watching a pathetic, tragic street performer put on a desperate show that had absolutely no power over reality. "Are you completely finished pouring out your useless garbage?" I said softly, my icy, calm voice instantly cutting through his loud screaming like a sharp blade. "You can shout at the top of your lungs, call me every disgusting name you know, and construct whatever wild fantasies you want, but the legal reality remains completely absolute. You have exactly 6 days left before the police arrive to throw you out of my house for criminal trespass. Wait, please, Kumiko. Let's just sit down and talk like civilized people, because you know you cannot handle a massive corporation all by yourself." Without my guidance, Kazuhiko suddenly pleaded, his arrogant tone completely vanishing as he realized his threats had zero effect. His voice began to shake pathetically, turning into a desperate whine, as he begged me to remember our 20 years of history together. Instead of arguing with his pathetic excuses, I decided to deliver a final, crushing financial blow that would dismantle the remaining pieces of his comfortable reality. "There is one more tiny piece of information that you should probably know before you start planning your next move. Kazuhiko," I murmured softly, looking down at a pair of scissors on my nightstand. "You know that exclusive, unlimited Black American Express card that you handed over to Maya so she could go on her massive shopping sprees?" I asked smoothly. "Did your arrogant, lazy brain completely forget that that card is actually a supplementary family card tied directly to my personal primary account?" Kazuhiko's heart violently skipped a beat, a cold sensation of absolute dread freezing his stomach as he listened to my words. "I passed the strict, high-level financial screening because I was the one managing all of your father's personal estate accounts for decades And exactly 1 hour ago, I called the credit card company and reported that specific card as permanently lost and stolen. Right about now, your glamorous young mistress is probably realizing that her unlimited ticket to luxury has been permanently deactivated. I smiled coldly. You absolute demon! How dare you humiliate me like this? Kazuhiko ground his teeth, his entire body shaking with a profound wave of explosive fury. But before he could even finish his sentence, the heavy glass doors of the mansion's living room slammed open with immense force, and a completely hysterical Maya stepped out onto the balcony, her face twisted in pure rage as she gripped her tablet. Kazuhiko! What the hell is going on with your money? She screamed at the top of her lungs, her high-pitched voice echoing perfectly through the phone line. I was trying to purchase a 50 million yen luxury diamond necklace online, and the system gave me a massive red error message stating that this card has been blacklisted for fraudulent activity and completely deactivated by the primary owner, she shrieked. I turned my head slightly, took a gentle sip of water, and delivered my final words to my ex-husband. Good luck finding a way to pay for your mistress's lifestyle and clearing out your things within the next 6 days. Kazuhiko, goodbye. I pressed the end call button, completely cutting off his voice as the silent hotel room returned to its peaceful quiet, leaving my former abuser standing alone in the freezing darkness of a garden that he no longer owned. The next morning, an immense sheet of heavy grey storm clouds blanketed the city of Tokyo, threatening to unleash a freezing torrential downpour at any moment. I dressed myself in a flawless, sharp black formal business suit, stepping out of my hotel room with an air of absolute purpose and leadership. Suddenly, the smartphone inside my bag rang with intense urgency, the screen displaying the name of Mr. Tanaka, the long-serving senior executive vice president of the Kawamura Group. I answered immediately, and his panicked, out-of-breath voice slammed into my ears. President Kumiko, we have an absolute catastrophic crisis happening at our central headquarters bank right now. Kazuhiko has completely lost his mind, and he just stormed into the regional director's private office with a gang of cheap lawyers, causing a massive public scene. My back went entirely rigid as the executive explained the pure malice of Kazuhiko's morning actions. Kazuhiko had taken the temporary asset freeze notice issued by the family court from his fraudulent lawsuit and presented it to our primary corporate bank, demanding they freeze all operational accounts immediately. He screamed at the bank directors, claiming that since the true ownership of the empire was currently being contested in court, the current management team had zero legal authority to move a single yen of the corporate funds. The bank executives, terrified of being dragged into a multi-billion yen inheritance litigation scandal, completely panicked and immediately implemented a total temporary freeze on all of our primary commercial checking accounts. Our entire corporate accounting team is in a state of absolute chaotic breakdown because all of our massive operational funds are completely locked. Tanaka cried over the phone, if these primary commercial bank accounts remain frozen for more than 48 hours, we will be completely unable to pay our massive network of subcontracting factories next week, and our main manufacturing plants will be forced to shut down entirely. Hundreds of independent family-owned suppliers will face immediate bankruptcy, and the Kawamura Group will officially default on its prime corporate bonds, completely destroying our credit rating and causing our public stock price to crash into absolute oblivion, he explained hysterically. Kazuhiko's bottomless malice had officially crossed a line of no return. He was so consumed by his own toxic greed and desperate desire to force me into total submission that he was fully prepared to burn down the entire corporate empire, destroying the lives of thousands of innocent employees and their families just to use the ashes as leverage against me. He didn't care about the lives of the workers. His entitled narcissistic brain only cared about securing a fortune that he never worked a single day to earn. Take a deep breath, Mr. Tanaka, and command the entire corporate team to remain absolutely calm and focused on their duties, I stated with an unshakable, powerful tone that instantly radiated true executive authority through the phone. Everything Kazuhiko has done this morning is built entirely on a foundation of fraudulent lies, and I am currently walking up the steps of the courthouse with lawyer Dojima to put a permanent legal end to his madness today. Please tell our employees that their new president will protect them no matter what, I added before hanging up my jaw, clenching with an intense wave of absolute burning determination. At exactly 1 o'clock, we arrived at the grand imposing stone building of the Tokyo Family Court, entering a high-security mediation room filled with long conference tables and an atmosphere of extreme legal tension. Sitting arrogantly on the leather sofa on the opposing side of the room was Kazuhiko, looking incredibly smug and confident, flanked by a sleazy, low-tier litigation lawyer who was flashing a deceptive grin. Sitting right next to them was Maya, wearing an incredibly flashy, inappropriate designer dress, and a middle-aged woman who kept her eyes glued to the floor, the exact rogue nurse who had been fired years ago for neglecting my father-in-law's medical care. "Good afternoon, Kumiko," the rogue nurse said with a disgusting, completely fabricated tone of victimhood as she looked up at me. My deep moral conscience simply would not allow me to remain silent any longer while you hid behind your fake mask of a loving daughter-in-law, she lied smoothly in front of the court mediators. "I am fully prepared to testify under absolute oath today that you systematically starved the late chairman, locked him inside a dark room without adequate medical equipment, and used extreme psychological abuse to force his shaking hand to sign that fraudulent will," she announced white-facedly. Kazuhiko let out a loud, mocking laugh, leaning back in his chair and sneering that my little corporate game was officially over. "I told you that you were completely out of your depth, you pathetic thief. And now that your precious corporate bank accounts are frozen, your precious executives are weeping for mercy," he mocked aggressively. He leaned across the table, sliding a formal legal document and a pen directly toward my face with an expression of pure malice. "This is a total permanent waiver of all inheritance rights and an immediate, unconditional transfer of all corporate executive power directly into my exclusive name," he stated coldly. "Sign this paper right now in front of the mediators, and I will immediately call the bank directors to unfreeze the accounts and save your precious company from total bankruptcy. If you refuse, I will ensure this nurse's testimony is handed over to the criminal prosecutors by sunset, and you will be dragged out of this courthouse in heavy handcuffs for elder abuse and grand extortion. Your entire life will be completely destroyed," he threatened with absolute certainty. The sleazy, low-tier lawyer, sitting next to Kazuhiko, let out a quiet, arrogant chuckle, adjusting his cheap suit jacket as he added that my legal position was completely non-existent and that immediate surrender was my only viable option to avoid a lengthy prison sentence. Maya leaned forward as well, her voice dripping with a toxic, mocking sweetness as she sneered that an old, useless woman like me should just accept her place at the bottom of society and sign the papers so the real elite could enjoy the wealth. Every single piece of evidence they presented was a completely manufactured, meticulously designed web of extortion meant to exploit my deep sense of responsibility toward the company's employees and force me into total financial ruin. They genuinely believed that by threatening the survival of the corporation, my natural protective instincts would cause me to break down, weep, and sign away my life to save others. But as I looked at their smug, greedy faces, a profound, icy silence filled my mind, and I slowly extended my arm, calmly pushing the document and the pen directly back into Kazuhiko's face. "I absolutely refuse your disgusting demands, and I will never sign a single piece of your fraudulent papers," I stated with an unshakable, booming voice that completely stunned the entire room into absolute silence. The smug grin instantly vanished from Kazuhiko's face, replaced by a dark, bulging vein of pure explosive fury on his forehead as he slammed his fist onto the table, screaming if I was completely insane, and if I wanted to watch the entire company burn to the ground while I rotted in a prison cell. "Your cheap, pathetic web of lies has officially reached its final destination, Kazuhiko," I replied with absolute calm. Suddenly, Lawyer Dojima stood up beside me, his dignified presence instantly commanding the room as he opened his heavy briefcase, extracting a small, worn, black digital audio recorder that bore the official evidence tags of the highest legal authorities. Mediators of the court, the entire mountain of testimony and audio evidence presented by the opposing side is a completely falsified, criminally manufactured conspiracy, Dojima announced with a deep, echoing voice. We are officially entering into the record the absolute unalterable audio. Journal recorded personally by the late Chairman Kawamura during the final weeks of his life, a device he secretly maintained to document the true events inside his home, the lawyer explained. Dojima reached down and pressed the play button, and the quiet mediation room was instantly filled with the frail, coughing, yet completely lucid voice of my late father-in-law. "Please, nurse, my chest hurts immensely. Can you please bring me my heart medication and a glass of water?" The old man gasped out in pain from the recording. "Stop whining and shut your mouth. I am currently in the middle of a high-stakes mobile game, and I don't have time to clean up after an old corpse." The rogue nurse's unmistakable, harsh voice blasted through the speaker. "Kazuhiko is paying me a massive cash bribe of 3 million yen to just sit here and pretend to care for you while he prepares his legal documents, so just stay quiet and die quickly so we can all collect our money." Her recorded voice continued with absolute clarity. The rogue nurse's face instantly turned a horrifying shade of green, her entire body shaking uncontrollably as she gasped for air, covering her mouth with her hands, as her own criminal voice completely exposed her perjury in front of the court officials. Kazuhiko's jaw dropped to the floor, his eyes bulging out of his skull as his brain completely fractured at the sound of the recording. The audio tape continued to play, revealing the deep emotional voice of the late chairman talking directly to lawyer Dojima. "My biological son is a completely remorseless monster who is actively conspiring with this nurse to exploit my illness. But my daughter-in-law, Kumiko, is the only angel protecting my life, holding my hand every single night and giving me the strength to survive," the old man stated with profound love. "My mind is completely sharp. My cognitive functions are flawless, and I am officially declaring that Kumiko will inherit everything I own, while my pathetic son will be left with absolutely nothing." The recording concluded with absolute finality. The click of the audio recorder shutting off felt like a massive, thunderous explosion inside the silent room, and the court mediators looked at Kazuhiko with eyes of intense, burning outrage. "Mr. Kawamura, Kazuhiko, you and your accomplice are officially in a state of absolute legal catastrophe," the head mediator stated with an icy tone that completely sealed their fate. The air inside the mediation room became incredibly heavy and suffocating as Kazuhiko sat completely paralyzed, thick drops of panicked sweat pouring down his pale face as his brain frantically scrambled to find a single lie to save himself. "This is an absolute high-tech digital fabrication, a completely artificial intelligence-generated voice, cloning that this manipulative witch manufactured to frame me and steal my birthright," he shrieked hysterically, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine that bounced uselessly off the walls. "My father loved me, and there is absolutely no way he would ever record such disgusting garbage about his own bloodline," he roared, looking at the mediators with wild, bloodshot eyes of pure desperation. But his sleazy, low-tier lawyer didn't say a single word in his defense. Instead, the man's face had turned completely white as he stared at the official digital forensic certification appended to the audio file, proving its absolute authenticity beyond a shadow of a doubt. Suddenly, the rogue nurse completely broke down, collapsing off her chair onto her knees, weeping hysterically as she grabbed her face and confessed to everything. "I am so incredibly sorry. I never wanted to commit perjury. But Kazuhiko came to my apartment, handed me 3 million yen in cash, and promised to pay me an additional 10 million yen from the inheritance if I signed that false statement, and accused the wife of elder abuse," she screamed frantically through her tears. "I never witnessed a single act of abuse by Kumiko. She was an absolute saint who cared for the chairman with profound love. Every single day, the nurse confessed, rapidly, desperate to avoid a long prison sentence for felony perjury." Kazuhiko jumped up in a fit of absolute manic rage, lunging toward the nurse and screaming that she was a traitorous, disgusting piece of trash who was destroying his life. "Silence," the head court mediator roared with extreme authority, slamming his hand on the desk and commanding the security guards to immediately restrain Kazuhiko. "This is an official court of law, and your violent criminal behavior will not be tolerated for a single second longer." the mediator declared with intense outrage. The false statements submitted by the moving party are officially recognized as total criminal perjury, and this court is immediately forwarding this entire file to the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department for immediate criminal prosecution for grand fraud, document forgery, and attempted extortion, the official announced with absolute finality. Kazuhiko's cheap litigation lawyer, realizing that his own career was about to be completely destroyed for participating in a criminal conspiracy, frantically began packing his papers into his briefcase, standing up and announcing that he was officially withdrawing as legal counsel, effective immediately due to being intentionally deceived by his client. "Wait, you cannot abandon me right now. I paid you a massive retainer fee. You have to save me." Kazuhiko screamed pathetically as his own lawyer ran out of the room without looking back even once. Kazuhiko collapsed back into his chair like a hollow shell, but lawyer Dojima stepped forward to deliver the final crushing blow. "Mediators, we have a secondary, highly urgent matter regarding a massive act of corporate sabotage committed by the disinherited son." This morning, Dojima stated, placing a fresh stack of financial audit records onto the table. Kazuhiko utilized a fraudulent family court document to intentionally deceive our primary commercial bank, causing a total freeze on the Kawamura Group's operational funds and placing thousands of jobs at immediate risk, the lawyer explained. "This is a severe, blatant act of criminal business obstruction and corporate sabotage, and the board of directors has already finalized a multi-million yen civil damages lawsuit against Kazuhiko as an independent individual," Dojima concluded coldly. Kazuhiko's eyes rolled back slightly as his entire body began to shake with a profound, unmitigated terror, realizing that his grandmaster plan had completely rebounded to destroy his own existence. Maya, realizing that her rich boyfriend was actually a bankrupt criminal who was about to spend years behind a prison bar, let out a loud screech, grabbed her designer bag, and violently pushed Kazuhiko away from her. "Get away from me, you disgusting, pathetic fraud. You told me you were a billionaire, CEO, but you're just a broke criminal who is going to jail," she yelled, running out of the room in her high heels as fast as she could. I stood up calmly, looking down at the broken, sweating man who had spent 20 years treating me like a worthless servant, feeling absolutely nothing but a profound sense of peaceful indifference. "Your time in my house and your time in the civilized world has officially reached its end, Kazuhiko," I said softly, turning my back on him permanently as Dojima and I walked out of the room, leaving his desperate weeping, pleas for mercy, echoing uselessly behind us. We stepped out of the heavy stone courthouse doors, and the bright, clear afternoon sun broke beautifully through the thick grey clouds, illuminating the bustling streets of Tokyo with a warm, golden light. We immediately drove straight to the central headquarters of our primary commercial bank, where lawyer Dojima presented the official sealed emergency declaration from the family court mediators, proving the absolute validity of my father-in-law's will and my exclusive executive power. The bank's regional director bowed deeply, sweating profusely, as he apologized for the temporary freeze and instantly activated all of our primary corporate accounts, ensuring our financial operations were completely restored. I immediately called Mr. Tanaka at the headquarters, and the moment I told him the accounts were unfrozen, the senior executive burst into loud, weeping tears of pure joy and relief. "Thank God, President Kumiko, you have single-handedly saved this empire and protected the livelihoods of thousands of innocent families," he cried out, and through the receiver I could hear the massive, thunderous cheers and applause of hundreds of employees celebrating in the corporate offices. Meanwhile, Kazuhiko dragged his broken, shivering body back to the ancestral mansion, entering a home that felt completely empty, dark and terrifyingly silent. "Maya, where are you, please? Answer me, I need you," he called out with a hollow, cracking voice. But the only response was the eerie echo of his own pathetically desperate words. He walked into the grand living room and completely froze in absolute horror as he looked at the massive, chaotic mess before his eyes. The entire room had been violently ransacked and cleared out, as Maya had utilized his absence to steal every single high-end luxury item, expensive brand-name bag, and piece of valuable artwork she could find. Even worse, the reinforced steel door of his mother's private bedroom safe had been violently pried open, and every single ounce of cash, gold, reserves, and irreplaceable family heirloom jewelry had been completely stolen by his greedy mistress, leaving him with absolutely nothing. That ungrateful, thieving monster took every single cent of my emergency cash reserves and abandoned me to rot. Kazuhiko shrieked, collapsing onto the hardwood floor and clutching his head as he let out a low animalistic groan of pure, unmitigated despair. Suddenly his phone vibrated loudly on the floor, displaying a phone number from an unknown private financial institution. He answered with a shaking hand, and a deep, aggressive and completely ruthless male voice blasted through the speaker. "Is this Kawamura Kazuhiko? We are calling from the Asset Recovery and Enforcement Department of the Neo Finance Corporation, and we are officially informing you that your emergency repayment deadline expired exactly 2 hours ago." The loan shark's cold, threatening words caused Kazuhiko's heart to skip a beat in pure terror as he remembered the dark truth of his hidden financial life. In his desperate, manic attempts to purchase Maya's shallow affection and fund their extravagant dates, he had quietly accumulated massive, high-interest short-term loans from multiple predatory shadow banking institutions, fully assuming he could easily repay them the moment his father's billions entered his pocket. The total outstanding balance, including massive default penalties and compounding interest, currently stands at exactly 12 million yen. And if this entire balance is not wired into our account by sunset, we will immediately initiate formal legal asset seizures and contact your employer to permanently garnish your wages," the lender stated callously. "Please, I am begging you for a small extension. I don't have a single yen right now, and I have just been fired from my family's company." Kazuhiko wept pathetically into the line. The lender let out a cold, mocking laugh, replying that they already knew he was an unemployed criminal who had been completely stripped of his inheritance, and that they would be dispatching field enforcement agents to his location immediately before hanging up the phone. Kazuhiko threw his phone against the wall in a fit of absolute manic terror, watching the screen shatter into a million tiny cracks as he realized that he had lost his wealth, his mistress, his social status, his home, and his entire future, leaving him with nothing but a mountain of unpayable debt and an impending prison sentence. A final text notification from lawyer Dojima illuminated the cracked screen on the floor, reading with professional detachment, "The Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department has officially processed our criminal complaint for grand fraud and business obstruction. A formal arrest warrant has been approved by a judge, and detectives are currently en route to your location to place you under arrest." Kazuhiko let out a low, strangled gasp, clutching his throat as the absolute weight of his self-inflicted destruction completely broke his mind, realizing that his systematic abuse and arrogance had officially led him into a permanent, inescapable, living hell. The dark, freezing winter came howling into the city of Tokyo, with an absolute vengeance unleashing an icy, biting wind that whistled through the high concrete walls of the Tokyo detention house. Kazuhiko sat huddled on a cold, hard plastic stool inside a dim, windowless legal visitation room, his entire body shivering violently under a thin, cheap grey cotton inmate jumpsuit. His hair was completely unkempt. His face was gaunt and hollow, and his shoulders slumped forward with a permanent posture of absolute defeat, entirely erasing the arrogant, wealthy businessman he used to be. Following a high-profile criminal trial, Kazuhiko had been found completely guilty on all counts of felony document forgery, attempted grand fraud, and criminal business obstruction, receiving a severe sentence of 3 years and 6 months of hard labor without any possibility of suspended execution. Furthermore, because his multi-million yen corporate embezzlement was classified as an intentional, malicious crime against his employer, the bankruptcy courts had officially ruled that his massive restitution debts could never be discharged through standard personal bankruptcy laws, meaning he would remain legally obligated to pay back every single yen for the rest of his natural life. Even after he completed his long prison sentence, he would emerge into society as a completely broke, middle-aged felon with a permanent criminal record pursued for the rest of his existence by relentless collection agencies and corporate court orders. Maya had also failed to escape the cold hand of justice, as her greedy, short-sighted actions had completely sealed her own total destruction. The moment Kazuhiko was arrested, the credit card companies launched a massive investigation into the high-end luxury stores where she had fraudulently utilized my supplementary family card after the official account termination. She was legally forced to return every single piece of stolen designer clothing and jewelry, and the massive remaining balances were permanently legally converted into her own personal high-interest consumer debt. When her traditional conservative parents in the countryside discovered her public scandal, her illicit affair with a married man, and her massive mountain of debt, they officially disowned her from the family registry and threw her out of their house permanently. Maya was currently working exhausting low-wage shifts in a cheap nighttime establishment, her youth and beauty rapidly fading under the immense physical and mental stress of a never-ending cycle of predatory debt collection. The shallow, toxic bond that had united Kazuhiko and Maya had never been built on a foundation of true love or human connection. It was simply a fragile castle of sand held together by stolen family money and a shared, twisted desire to look down on a vulnerable woman. The very second the money disappeared, their illusion of happiness completely shattered into a million pieces, leaving them both to rot in their own separate versions of financial and social purgatory. Kazuhiko stared blankly through the thick, scratched acrylic glass barrier of the visitation room, his hollow, empty eyes looking at the state-appointed public defender who was indifferently organizing his legal files. Do I have a single personal letter? A package or a visitation request from anyone in the outside world? Kazuhiko asked with a dry, cracked whisper that sounded completely dead. The public defender didn't even look up from his papers, simply shaking his head with a cold sigh and stating that absolutely nobody had requested to see him or sent a single inquiry about his well-being since the day his trial ended. Kazuhiko slowly pulled his arms tightly around his emaciated chest, shivering from the bitter cold of the unheated prison wing. His mind completely flooded with the vibrant, warm memories of the life he had so callously thrown away. He vividly remembered how no matter how cold the winter night was, the windows of his ancestral home always glowed with a beautiful, welcoming golden light when he arrived home from his corporate meetings. The kitchen table was always meticulously set with a steaming bowl of hot miso soup, fresh grilled fish, and his favorite homemade dishes, prepared with profound care by a wife who patiently waited for his return despite his constant coldness. No matter how cruel, dismissive, and abusive he had been, there had always been a dedicated, loving family unit, quietly sustaining his entire existence behind the scenes, providing an absolute, unconditional safety net that kept him grounded in luxury. "Kumiko, please save me." "I'm so sorry," Kazuhiko wept silently, pressing his forehead against the freezing acrylic glass, as massive hot tears poured down his hollow cheeks, his voice sounding like a broken animal choking on its own blood. In the absolute silence of his dark concrete prison cell, every single night, he finally understood the terrifying truth of his existence. The quiet, plain woman he had systematically looked down upon and treated like a common, disposable maid was actually the single most important pillar that held his entire life together. She had protected his reputation, endured his flaws, and given up her own dreams to keep his family alive, and he had voluntarily thrown her into the trash just to chase a glittering, hollow illusion. At that exact same moment across the city, I was standing gracefully in front of a massive, floor-to-ceiling glass window inside the magnificent executive penthouse suite of the Kawamura corporate headquarters, calmly looking down at the beautiful snow-dusted skyline of Tokyo. The interior of the massive office was perfectly heated, completely enveloped in a luxurious, warm, and serene atmosphere, while a beautiful bouquet of seasonal white flowers sat elegantly on my heavy executive desk. The desktop was covered with high-level corporate strategies, international market expansions, and major philanthropic initiatives awaiting my final stamped presidential approval. Transitioning from a traditional isolated housewife to the chief executive officer of a massive multi-billion-yen commercial conglomerate had been an incredibly daunting, grueling journey, filled with initial mistakes, exhausting sleepless nights, and intense professional pressure. For the past few years, I had spent almost every single evening huddled around conference tables with Mr. Tanaka and our legal teams tirelessly studying advanced corporate finance, reading complex commercial laws, and learning how to lead an empire from scratch. I refused to let my father-in-law's lifetime legacy be destroyed by the greed of his reckless son, and that single unshakable purpose gave me an indestructible, transcendent strength to conquer every single obstacle in my path. The wonderful employees of the Kawamura Group had quickly recognized my raw, sincere dedication, abandoning their initial anxieties and uniting behind my leadership with profound corporate loyalty and genuine human respect. I had permanently eliminated the toxic, fear-driven corporate culture that Kazuhiko had cultivated during his time as a director, completely cutting out the multi-million yen executive entertainment funds that he had used to finance his secret affairs and lavish parties. Instead, I directed every single yen of those massive corporate reserves directly into increasing the baseline salaries of our factory workers, expanding maternal and paternal leave benefits, and building high-quality, free childcare facilities for our staff. When I stood before the General Assembly of Workers and announced that the true strength of our empire belonged entirely to the frontline laborers who poured their sweat into our products, the entire stadium erupted into a thunderous weeping ovation of true solidarity. Under my progressive management, employee productivity and innovation soared to unprecedented heights, and the Kawamura Group successfully shattered its historical revenue records for 3 consecutive fiscal years, becoming a shining model of corporate responsibility in the region. The entitled, arrogant words that Kazuhiko had screamed at me during our final confrontation came drifting back into my mind like a faint, meaningless whisper from a past life. You are a completely useless housewife with 0 skills who will fail immediately in the real world. I had taken those exact hateful insults and completely transformed them into fuel, delivering an absolute objective proof through multi-billion yen corporate success that his narrow, misogynistic mindset was entirely and utterly wrong. Suddenly, a gentle knock echoed through the serene office, and my brilliant young executive assistant stepped inside with a warm, respectful smile, placing a beautiful porcelain cup of hot chamomile tea onto my desk. "Thank you so much, Sarah. Your excellent attention to detail always brings an immense amount of peace to my daily schedule." I smiled warmly, and her eyes sparkled with genuine pride and happiness as she bowed and thanked me for my kindness. There was absolutely no fear, no tension, and no toxicity left in this corporate palace. We were a beautiful, thriving, professional family built on mutual respect and shared success. I took a slow, calming sip of the warm tea, my eyes casually falling upon a tiny, insignificant article printed on the back page of the morning newspaper sitting on the corner of my desk. The brief legal notice coldly reported that the criminal appeals for the Kawamura corporate embezzlement case had been officially rejected by the High Court, permanently solidifying the prison sentence of the primary defendant. I looked at the cold, clinical printing of his name, took a deep, quiet breath, and felt an absolute, profound sense of emotional stillness settle over my entire heart. I felt 0 hatred toward him, 0 desire for further revenge, and absolutely 0 regret. His existence had become completely distant and irrelevant to the grand, beautiful reality of my new life. He was simply an organic consequence of his own terrible choices, experiencing the precise, unforgiving weight of the universe balancing the scales of justice after decades of cruelty and exploitation. I folded the newspaper quietly, walked over to the recycling bin, and dropped it inside, without a single moment of hesitation, permanently casting his memory out of my day. There was absolutely no room left for his toxicity in the brilliant, expansive future I was actively building for myself and my company. For 20 long years, I had completely suppressed my own identity, hidden my intellect, and allowed myself to be treated like an invisible servant out of a misguided sense of marital duty. But standing here in the warmth of my hard-earned freedom, I realized with absolute certainty that those difficult years of silent endurance had not been wasted. They had quietly forged my spirit into an indestructible diamond, preparing me to rule this empire with true wisdom and profound empathy. I looked at my hands, which were now soft, beautifully manicured, and strong, completely healed from the rough scars of my past life of domestic servitude. I raised my head, looked out at the infinite blue sky stretching across the grand horizon, and whispered a quiet, loving message of gratitude to my late father-in-law, knowing that his final will had given me the ultimate gift, the absolute freedom to discover my true worth and live a magnificent life entirely on my own terms.